Building on consumer theory with behavioral economics. Every day, we're faced with thousands of decisions. Where do we spend our money? On clothes, on food, or possibly on an extravagant vacation we've been wanting to take? A lot of these decisions can be explained through the theory of consumer behavior. This is a branch of microeconomics that tries to explain the demand of individual consumers. This model is based on the following three assumptions. Consumers have clear preferences for some goods over others. They have budget constraints, meaning they have limited incomes, a certain amount of money they can spend on these goods. And with each decision, they try to maximize their satisfaction or utility, the amount of well-being they get from making this decision. Despite holding true in many situations, there are decisions consumer theory can't explain, due to the fact that people don't hold true to the assumptions of the model. Despite having supercomputers at our fingertips every second of the day, we don't have all the information needed to make decisions. We can break our budget constraints with the easy accessibility of debt, and we don't always have clear preferences for one good over another. All these facts contradict the image of the rational consumer the theory paints.
These flaws gave rise to behavioral economics. By identifying these cognitive biases and errors in thinking, it will allow us to have a better representation on how decisions are made and make better decisions in our own lives. Purchasing decisions can be quite complex, and there are a variety of factors that influence our purchasing behaviors. As people, we do not always make decisions in accordance with the theory of consumer behavior, and we want to highlight three errors in thinking that behavioral economics has identified that apply specifically to decisions students make in their everyday lives. The first being the anchoring effect. The formal definition of the anchoring effect is the tendency to rely heavily on one prior piece of information when making a decision. An example of this in everyday life is the decision of what coffee to buy. Starbucks, through marketing and advertising, has done a great job at anchoring the idea that their coffee is of higher quality and can therefore charge a higher price. We even tested this. From a sample of 33 of our classmates, we found that 93% of students thought that Starbucks coffee was of higher quality and are willing to pay more for it. The anchoring effect emphasizes that consumers are not always rational when making purchasing decisions. Another flaw of consumer theory that is explained through behavioral economics is the fact that the budget constraint assumption can be broken by acquiring debt.
Breaking budget constraints. Budget constraints vary for individuals based on their income, along with the changing of prices for certain products or services. However, due to the fact that debt is easily accessible, consumers can often stretch themselves beyond their budget constraints. This was obvious in the 2008 financial crisis. Consumers borrowed significantly more than their budget would allow, eventually causing the need for government bailouts and monetary stimulus. Reassuringly, when our sample group was asked, "Are you more willing to buy a used car with cash or a new car financed through debt?" 68.75% of students answered they would buy the used car with cash, opposed to 31.25% who chose to take on debt. Though debt is not always bad, students should approach using debt with caution. The bandwagon effect and impulse buying. The bandwagon effect is a psychological phenomenon in which people do something primarily because other people are doing it. Impulse buying is when an individual buys a product or service that they had not previously planned on buying. Occasionally, when individuals see others buying a specific product or service, they tend to make an impulse decision and buy that product or service. This shows how consumers' decisions are not always based on a rational thought process. They impulsively follow what others are doing. Another example of this is what they call an informational cascade. This is when people's decisions are based in part on the actions of others, which in turn were based on the actions of others. It's a domino effect. This process is closely correlated to the formation of market bubbles. We conducted a short survey with a specific question relating to these topics. Have you ever bought something only because somebody else owned it? As you can see, 62.5% of the people said that they have bought something solely based off somebody else owning it.
In sum, behavioral economics and their incorporation of cognitive biases are a useful extension to traditional consumer theory when explaining our everyday purchasing decisions. By being aware of these biases, it allows us to combat our irrational behavior.
When making decisions, the following are things to think about. Are you paying more for something that is actually better quality, or have you fallen prey to flashy marketing? Try and observe your decisions objectively.
Before taking on debt, try and ask yourself, would your future self thank you for making this decision? Take the decision out of the short term and put it in the long term perspective. Lastly, Mark Twain provides a perfect antidote for combating the bandwagon effect. Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect. Make sure you're not blindly following.